The first time I heard of the Willowridge Estates HOA was when a woman named Francine McConnell showed up on my porch with a binder thicker than a law textbook and a scowl that could crack drywall. "Mr. Thayer Sanders," she asked, like she was expecting me to lie. "Yeah," I said, holding my coffee with one hand and the door frame with the other. It was Saturday. I was in sweatpants. No one should have to deal with a Francine before noon. "I'm the president of the Willowridge Estates Homeowners Association. We've been reviewing our files and noticed you haven't submitted your HOA membership dues." "That's probably because I never joined your HOA," I said. "I bought this house last year, no mention of any association." Francine didn't blink. "Every homeowner in Willowridge is automatically subject to our bylaws. You signed the property deed, yes. Sure, but I read it cover to cover. There's no mention of an HOA or mandatory dues." I took a sip of coffee. Trust me, I was raised by a lawyer. Francine's eye twitched. "Well then, Mr. Sanders, you'll be receiving a formal notice. Failure to comply will result in legal consequences." "Sounds like a threat," I said. "It's a promise," she snapped, pivoting on her heel and storming off down my driveway like she owned the asphalt. I watched her get into a lime green Prius plastered with HOA Proud bumper stickers. That was the beginning of it. 3 days later, I got a certified letter from the Willowridge Estates HOA Legal Committee which, as I would later learn, consisted entirely of Francine and her husband Ted, who was not a lawyer. The letter demanded I pay 2 years' worth of back dues, which made no sense since I'd only lived there for one, plus a $500 non-compliance penalty. It ended with a court summons. I called my buddy Damien, who actually is a lawyer, and read him the letter. "They're suing you for not joining an HOA that doesn't exist on your deed," he asked. "That's bold. They're dragging me to court over it." "You should thank them," Damien said. "This could be fun." The court date was set for the following month. Until then, Francine didn't let up. She'd show up uninvited, snap photos of my lawn, leave reminder letters taped to my door, and once even yelled at my kid, Ava, for riding her scooter too fast on the sidewalk. That's when I installed cameras. Every angle of my front yard, driveway, and porch was covered. Francine didn't like that one bit. One morning, I caught her on video holding her phone up to my security camera, recording it like she was the one gathering evidence. I uploaded everything to a folder labeled Francine's Greatest Hits. By the time the court date rolled around, I had a stack of documents, property records, and video footage. Francine showed up in a full pantsuit with a lavender clipboard and a smug look that said she thought she'd already won. She didn't even bring a lawyer. I guess she thought her title as president of Willowridge Estates HOA carried legal weight. It didn't. The judge, an older guy with a no-nonsense tone and a deep sigh that said he'd seen too many HOA cases, looked over the documents I handed him. Then he turned to Francine. "Ma'am, can you show me where in the property records this HOA is established as a mandatory governing body?" Francine cleared her throat. "It's an understood agreement among neighbors. We've had the HOA in place for over 10 years. "That's not what I asked," the judge said. "Do you have a legally recorded declaration of covenants, conditions, and restrictions that includes Mr. Sanders' property?" She hesitated. "Well, not officially recorded, but we so no legally binding documents," the judge said, setting her papers aside. "In that case, your association has no standing to enforce dues or penalties on non-members." Francine's face blanched. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Sanders, thank you for your patience. You are under no obligation to join or pay this group. In fact, this court finds that the Willowridge Estates HOA has been operating without proper legal authority. I am declaring the association void." Francine started to protest, but the judge raised a hand. "Furthermore, any attempts at continued harassment or misrepresentation of authority may be grounds for criminal charges." I looked over at Francine. Her hands were shaking. It wasn't over yet. The courthouse steps were still behind me when my phone buzzed. Damien's name lit up the screen. Tell me you walked out of there with a ruling and a smile, he said. They didn't just lose, I said. The judge voided the entire HOA. There was a pause. Wait, what? Apparently, they never recorded a single document properly. No legal standing, no authority, nothing. They've been bluffing for over a decade. Damien let out a low whistle. That's not just negligence. That's fraud if they collected dues from other homeowners. That word hit like a cold wind. Fraud. I hadn't thought of it that way, but now that it was out there, it was obvious. Francine hadn't just tried to rope me, and she'd been extorting the entire block under a fake banner of authority. If she'd done it to me, she'd definitely done it to others. I hung up and drove straight back to Willowridge, my mind turning over possibilities. The neighborhood felt different now. Not quieter, more alert, like it was holding its breath. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a group of neighbors clustered near the community bulletin board by the park. I'd never seen more than one person look at that thing before. I walked over. A printed letter was pinned dead center, with Francine's red signature at the bottom. It was titled, "Temporary Dissolution of HOA Due to Legal Misunderstanding." I read it twice. She was trying to spin the judge's decision as a minor hiccup, claiming the association would reform with proper documentation and resume oversight in a few months. "What a load of garbage," said a voice behind me. I turned to see a man in his 50s, weathered hands, oil-stained jeans, and a name patch reading Illy on his mechanic's shirt. "She's been threatening to fine me for parking my work truck in my own driveway for years," he said. "Even made me repaint my garage door once because it was too matte." "Did she ever show you any legal documents?" I asked. "Never, just stapled notices and her little clipboard." I looked around at the others. A woman with twin toddlers nodded. "She charged me $200 for a noise violation last year, said my kids were laughing too loud during naptime hours. She told me I had to remove my wheelchair ramp because it didn't match the aesthetic," said an elderly man with a cane. "I had to threaten to call the news just to keep it up." I pulled out my phone and opened the folder with Francine's video antics. "You all need to see this." We huddled around the screen as I played clips of her marching across my lawn, snapping photos of nothing, pointing at security cameras like they were armed guards. I ended with the footage of her yelling at Ava from the sidewalk. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Ellie spoke. "How many years do you think she's been collecting money off this?" 10, I said. That's what she told the judge, and the court ruled she had no authority to do any of it. The mother with the twins looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon. "My husband and I thought we were helping the neighborhood. We paid over $4,000 total." Illy crossed his arms. "If she's been taking money without legal authority, that's theft." I nodded. "I ran it by my lawyer. It could be felony fraud. Especially if there's a paper trail." "She always made us pay by check," said the elderly man. "She said it was for transparency." I looked at him. "That's great. That means we can trace everything." The next morning, I drove down to the county recorder's office and requested copies of every document ever filed under the Willowridge Estates name. The clerk, a sharp-eyed woman named Nina, raised an eyebrow. "Not much here," she said, flipping through a slim folder. "There's a single declaration signed back in 1997, but it was never notarized or officially recorded. It's not enforceable. Any bank accounts or tax filings? None that we have on record. If they were operating as a nonprofit HOA, they should have filed with the state. Want me to check that?" "Yes, please." Nina returned 10 minutes later with an expression somewhere between amusement and suspicion. "They filed nothing. No business license, no tax ID. It's like they never existed except on paper they handed out themselves." I thanked her and left with copies of everything she'd found. Back home, I spread the documents across the dining table and started outlining a timeline. Each year they collected dues, each fine they issued, and any names I could pull from the community Facebook group that had interacted with them. Over the next 2 weeks, I spoke to over 24 neighbors. Many had receipts, canceled checks, or digital payment records. I cataloged every single one, the total. Over $93,000 collected with no oversight, no legal authority, and no accountability. That's when things escalated. Francine must have caught wind of our organizing because she sent out a mass email under a new name, Willowridge Community Standards Committee. Same tone, same threats. She claimed she was rebranding the HOA and that all previous dues would be grandfathered in to the new structure. It was a desperate move and a stupid one. I forwarded that email to Damien. He called back 2 hours later. She just admitted in writing that she's continuing to enforce dues from a dissolved and illegal organization under a new name. That's fraud, mail fraud, and possibly wire fraud. Can we take her down for good? We already can, but now you've got a case for restitution. We filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of 27 residents. Each had paid between $1,000 and $7,000 over the years. We included Francine and her husband Ted in the suit and subpoenaed their bank records. The court date was scheduled 6 weeks out. In the meantime, I got a call from a detective with the county's financial crimes unit. Turns out, one of my neighbors had filed a criminal complaint after I showed her the documents. She'd also shared the footage of Francine issuing fake citations and pocketing checks. Detective Lujan met me at my house. She was direct, no nonsense, and clearly not impressed with what she'd seen so far. She's been pretending to be a public official, Lujan said, flipping through her tablet. That's impersonation. The fact that she kept collecting money after the judge's ruling, that's criminal intent. And if she deposited those checks into a personal account? She did, I said, handing over a scanned image from one neighbor's bank statement. Accounts under her name, no business title, Lujan nodded. That's enough to open a formal investigation. The next week, Francine's house was raided. Neighbors watched as officers carried out boxes of documents, computers, and hard drives. Ted stood on the porch in slippers, looking like someone had unplugged his entire understanding of the world. Francine was arrested later that afternoon. The charges: wire fraud, impersonation of a public official, and theft by deception. Her bail was denied due to evidence she tried to move funds after learning about the investigation. The neighborhood didn't celebrate exactly. But there was a strange sort of relief in the air, like a storm had finally passed and left the ground clear. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't just about one rogue HOA president. It was about every person on this block who'd been bullied, manipulated, or silenced by someone who thought a clipboard and a title gave them power. It wasn't over yet. But for the first time, Willowridge stood a chance at becoming a real community, not because of rules or fines, but because we'd finally taken it back. The first court victory had done more than pull back a curtain, it had kicked open a door. In the days after Francine's arrest, Willowridge felt like a shaken beehive. Some neighbors were furious, others stunned, and a few openly embarrassed that they'd ever trusted her. But one thing was clear: no one wanted to go back to the way things were. I was in the middle of organizing the restitution paperwork with Damien when my doorbell rang. 2 women stood there, one in her mid-30s with a clipboard, a real one, not the Francine kind, and another in scrubs, her badge still clipped to her collar. "You're Thayer Sanders, right?" the woman in scrubs asked. "Yeah, can I help you? I'm Claire Watterson. This is my sister, Libby. We've been living on Juniper Circle for 6 years. We've got something you need to see." Claire handed me a folder. Inside were copies of emails and typed letters, all bearing the same letterhead: Willowridge Estates Compliance Division. But these weren't the standard fine notices. They were eviction threats. She told us we weren't in good standing and that the HOA had the right to reclaim our property if we didn't pay the infractions balance, Claire said. "We thought it was legal. We even hired a lawyer, but he kept stringing us along and then just stopped responding." Libby leaned in. "Turns out the lawyer was Ted's cousin. He never filed anything." I flipped through the papers. The language was aggressive, almost militaristic talk of removal from community ownership, asset reassignment, and property turnover. It was structured to look official, but there wasn't a single statute or legal reference, just fake legalese and threats designed to intimidate. "She sent these to how many people?" I asked. "At least 7 that we know of," Claire said. "We've been comparing notes, there might be more." That changed everything. This wasn't just embezzlement or impersonation. This was attempted property seizure under fraudulent authority, a whole other level of criminal intent. We met that night in Ellie's garage. He'd cleared out the tools and set up a folding table with chairs. Word had gotten around fast, and more than 20 residents showed up. I brought copies of Claire's documents and laid them out beside the bank records and court filings. "I think we're looking at a pattern," I said. "This wasn't about neighborhood aesthetics or dues. She was trying to build a paper empire one she controlled top to bottom." "What would she have done if someone actually left?" asked a woman named Rosa, who ran a small bakery from her home. "She probably would have tried to seize the house," Damien said, dialing in on speakerphone. "She knew most people wouldn't push back. That's how scams like this work, they rely on fear and confusion." A short man in a flannel jacket stood up. "My brother-in-law works at the assessor's office. He says Francine submitted requests to be listed as the community trustee on at least 3 properties. They flagged it because that's not a recognized role." That got everyone murmuring. "Did they approve any of it?" I asked. "No," he said. "They sat on them, figuring it was an internal dispute." Rosa looked down at the table. "She tried to take our homes." The next morning, I drove to the district attorney's office with Claire and Libby. We brought everything: documents, statements, digital files. The intake officer took one look at the forged eviction threats and immediately brought in a senior investigator. By the end of the week, the scope of the criminal case had doubled. Francine wasn't just facing fraud charges. She was now under investigation for attempted real estate theft, forgery, and obstruction of official proceedings. Ted was implicated too. He'd notarized several of the fake notices himself, despite not being certified. A grand jury was convened. Meanwhile, the civil class action expanded. More neighbors came forward with proof of payments and manipulated communications. One man, a retired firefighter named Howard, had been issued a compliance lien on his property, something that doesn't even exist under state law. He'd paid nearly $2,000 just to clear his title before refinancing. At the next community meeting, we held it outside in the park, folding chairs scattered under the trees. For the first time, people weren't just venting, they were planning. Rosa proposed a neighborhood council, one without any authority to issue fines or collect dues. Just a place for communication and support. "We don't need someone telling us to paint our fences," she said. "We need someone who can help us fix a broken pipe or find a good babysitter when we're stuck." That's what a community should be. The vote to form the Willowridge Neighborhood Forum passed unanimously, but not everyone was ready to let the past go. 2 weeks before Francine's trial, I received a letter in a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a single typed sheet. "You think you've won, but this neighborhood belongs to those who enforce order, not chaos. You've woken something that can't be put down." I brought it to Detective Lugin the same day. She had it dusted for prints, but the lab came back clean, gloves likely. However, the printer's ink had a faint blue hue specific to a discontinued model. Only 3 people in the county had registered warranties on that model in the past 5 years. One of them was Ted. When they showed up to search his garage again, they found a hidden storage cabinet behind a pegboard. Inside were dozens of files, some labeled with names of residents, others with strange titles like Compliance Recovery Targets and Property Leverage Phase Roman II. There was even a spreadsheet tracking who might be vulnerable to pressure. The DA's office added conspiracy and intimidation to the charges. The trial started on a rainy Monday. Francine entered in a navy blazer flanked by 2 public defenders. Ted wasn't there, he was being tried separately due to new evidence that he'd funneled funds into a shell company called Ridgewell Strategies. Claire testified first, then Libby, then Howard. Each told their story with a quiet, steady fury. The jury watched, stone-faced, as the prosecution displayed copies of the forged documents and the ledger showing over $90,000 in personal deposits. I was called near the end of the second day. The prosecutor asked about my first encounter with Francine, then walked me through the camera footage, the court ruling, and the evidence I'd compiled. When she finished, she asked, "In your opinion, Mr. Sanders, why did she do all this?" I looked at Francine. Her jaw was tight, hands clasped in her lap. She liked control. She thought if she dressed it up in rules and paperwork, no one would question it. She didn't think anyone would fight back. Francine didn't look away, but she didn't speak either. The jury deliberated for less than a day. She was found guilty on all counts: fraud, impersonation of a public official, attempted real estate theft, conspiracy, obstruction, and criminal harassment. Ted's trial followed. He pled out halfway through and agreed to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. The restitution fund was ordered by the court to be repaid from the liquidation of their assets, their house, 2 vehicles, and the Ridgewell account, which had over $30,000 in it. In the aftermath, life in Willowridge changed. The fake HOA signs were taken down. The Facebook group was reopened under a new moderator. Illy organized weekend repair crews to help neighbors with overdue home projects. Rosa's Bakery started offering free coffee on Sunday mornings in the park, and Claire. She ran for city council the following spring. She won in a landslide. People still talk about what happened, not with fear but with pride. Because for the first time in years, the residents of Willowridge knew exactly who they were, not members of a fake association, not pawns in someone's power game, but neighbors. And no one was ever going to take that from them again. 3 months passed. Long enough for the shock to settle, but not long enough for people to forget. The courtroom battles had ended, and Francine's sentencing was scheduled for early fall. She was being held without bond, and the house she once ruled like a palace now sat vacant, its blinds drawn tight as if ashamed of what had happened inside. Meanwhile, Willowridge was learning to breathe again. Ava's scooter was no longer a cause for neighborhood panic. Howard had painted his garage door bright blue, just for the hell of it. And Rosa's bakery window had a small decal that read "No clipboards allowed," which cracked everyone up except Ted, who had quietly moved out of state under a different last name. But then, just as the neighborhood was settling into its new rhythm, something strange happened. Claire found it first. She was helping an elderly neighbor organize old paperwork when she came across a manila envelope labeled "Archive Do Not Destroy." Inside were 15 letters, each bearing the same format as the old compliance notices. They were all addressed to people who had moved away years before, residents who had abruptly sold their homes and disappeared without saying much. Claire brought the envelope to me that night. Her fingers tapped nervously against her knee as I read through the letters. "They all got the same threat," she said. "Non-compliance penalties, property turnover clauses, but here's the thing, they didn't fight it, they just left." I turned over one of the letters. A line at the bottom had been underlined in red ink. "Failure to comply will result in immediate legal recourse and forfeiture of community standing." "Do we know where any of them went?" I asked. "One," she said. "A guy named Marcus Delaney. He sold his place in 2019. No forwarding address, but I found a P.O. box listed on the sale paperwork. I think he's still in state." The next morning, I drove out to the address she gave me. The mailbox facility sat between a liquor store and a vape shop on the edge of a half-abandoned strip mall. I waited outside until a tall man with a gray hoodie and a limp walked out holding a stack of mail. I recognized him from the old HOA Facebook photos. Marcus. He froze when I called his name. "Not here to start anything," I said. "I live in Willowridge now." "Just need to know why you really left." He looked at the ground for a long moment, then back at me. "You ever get one of those letters?" he asked. "The ones that say if you don't pay, they'll take your house and report you to the city?" I nodded. They came after me hard. Said they had legal authority to place a lien. Then they claimed I was running an unlicensed business out of my garage. I wasn't. I was fixing cars for my brother, but they reported me to the county anyway. My stomach turned. "They filed a complaint?" I asked. "Yeah." I got a visit from a county inspector. He said it was anonymous, but it wasn't hard to figure out who it came from. I didn't have the money to fight a zoning violation and a bogus lien at the same time, so I sold and left. Took a loss on the house. Did you ever talk to a lawyer, didn't have the money, and they made it sound like they had the law on their side? I drove straight to the county zoning office. After some smooth talking and an espresso from a nearby gas station, a clerk pulled up the records. Between 2017 and 2020, there had been 12 anonymous complaints filed from within Willowridge. All were against residents who later moved. 6 of the complaints had come from a single IP address. I took a photo and sent it to Damien. He called me 20 minutes later. "That IP address belongs to a residential connection," he said. "I traced it back. It was Francine and Ted's house. Every complaint came from their Wi-Fi." "They used code enforcement as a weapon," I said. "Yeah. And if they used that to force people into selling, we're looking at coercion and abuse of governmental process. That's a felony." Detective Lujan reopened the investigation within the week. She pulled property sale records and matched them to the complaint dates. 4 of the residents had been cited for false violations and left within 60 days. The DA added new charges to Francine's case: fraudulent inducement and malicious misuse of public systems to intimidate homeowners into selling. When sentencing day arrived, the courtroom was packed. Francine sat motionless as the judge read through the charges, now totaling 14 counts. The room was silent as each was listed, and her expression only cracked once, when Marcus walked in and sat in the second row. He never looked away. The judge sentenced her to 13 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 9. Ted received a 5-year sentence for aiding and abetting, plus a civil penalty that would cost him everything he had left. Afterward, the DA held a press conference. "Let this case be a warning," she said. "There is no such thing as neighborhood sovereignty. No one is above the law, especially not under the illusion of community enforcement." Claire and I watched from the back of the crowd. She handed me a folder with the last of the restitution forms. "That's everyone," she said. "Even Marcus, he's moving back." I looked at the old HOA building across the street. It had been shuttered and stripped of its signage. The windows were boarded and the locks had been changed. Soon, the city would repurpose it as a community youth center. "Think we'll ever need to hold another meeting like that first one?" I asked. "Maybe," she said. "But next time, it won't be about fighting someone. It'll be about planning something." Rosa started a weekend market in the park with booths for local artists and food carts. Ellie donated a tool shed to the community and ran a free repair clinic every other Saturday. Marcus took over as the new neighborhood liaison, advocating for fair housing out of the same office where Francine once issued threats. And me. I took down the last of the old security cameras. Not because I didn't need them anymore, but because I wanted my daughter to grow up in a place where we didn't live under surveillance hours or anyone else's. One evening, Ava and I were walking the dog when she pointed to a small plaque near the park entrance. It had been installed quietly, without ceremony, in honor of the neighbors who stood up against fraud, fear, and false authority. Below it were the names of everyone who testified. She tugged at my sleeve. "You think she ever thought she'd get caught?" I shook my head. "No." That's why she kept going. People like Francine don't stop because they think they're right. They stop when they're forced to. Ava looked at the plaque again. Good. We kept walking as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Willowridge. The sidewalk felt solid beneath our feet. the air calm, and the neighborhood for the first time in years quiet for all the right reasons.